welcome everyone. I don't know if you all know Molly. Molly was one of our wonderful English teachers at SAR High School. She did a book club earlier this year, and now we, thank God, have her back for another book. And we are calling her a prophetess, that she knew that this was a great book and was going to eventually become a Pulitzer this year.
Of course I knew.
So welcome. We're so happy to have everybody here. Hope you enjoyed the book, and I'm turning it over to Molly. And those of you, I don't know about the muting, unmuting, but you know, you.
Oh, as long as we don't get echoes, I'd rather people didn't have to unmute. I'd rather people just chimed in. It's easier that way. I never made people raise their hands in my class, so I'm better. I'm an old school SAR teacher. I like noise. So unless we get a feedback or something like that. So let me start with I read this book a while back and I loved it. And there's a I don't know exactly what you call it, like not organization. This woman here in Manhattan has done, it's called Book the Author. And I'm not exactly, she's an author herself. I'm not exactly sure how she gets them, but she gets authors to come speak in people's homes. You have to have, you read the book and then the author comes. And this winter, I heard him speak. I heard Diaz sitting in the living room of and what they do is they don't tell you where it's going to be until you've signed up and everything. So it's not a public, anyway. So sitting in an Upper West Side living room, I heard him just talk and answer questions, which was really, it changed my view of the book when I read it again, which isn't always the case. Sometimes authors are not quite as interesting, and sometimes they're more interesting. But there's a couple of things I want to show you, sort of as a preface. Let me. What am I? All right. The first thing. Go to where I put them all. I think the first thing this has nothing to do particularly with this book. Oh, let me go back and share my screen because otherwise it won't work. This is him talking about accents, because he has an accent, and having him talk about what it means. Let me go to share screen. Where to go? Why'd it go away?
In the middle, on the bottom?
Yeah. Oh, there it is. There it is. It went away. Share screen. I'm going to go to this one. Share. Okay. So the first thing, I'm just going to show you a little bit of it. And then if you want to, take down and want to watch the rest of it. But the reason I'm showing it to you is I want you to get a feel for Diaz's his process and him as a person. So I'm going to show you just a little bit of it. Then later I'm going to show you some other
We've all heard of racial profiling, but what about accent?
Oh, why can't I get this to be bigger? Come on. All right.
We've all heard of racial profiling, but what about accent profiling? Hernan Diaz is the associate director of the Hispanic Institute at Columbia University, and his first novel was recently nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. Those are certainly accomplishments, yet he possesses something else that sets him apart. That is tonight's In My Humble Opinion.
I work at a university in New York with a large population of international students. Walking around campus the other day, I was perplexed to see flyers advertising accent reduction or even accent elimination. Having been born in Argentina, grown up in Sweden, and spent most of my life in the United States, I have to some degree a foreign accent in every language I speak. Something in my Spanish makes taxi drivers in Buenos Aires ask me where I'm from. In Swedish, my accent is very slight, but I have the vocabulary of a 12-year-old. In my early 20s, I lived in London for a couple of years, which left its mark. But the fact is, I got English almost as a gift through Swedish, and there is still a Scandinavian lilt in there. Does my accent need correcting? I don't think so. To sound like who exactly? A native speaker? What would that even mean? Looking at accent reduction classes online, the third hit I got was not aimed at Eastern European or South American immigrants. It actually read, want to get rid of your New York accent? An accent can be a stigma, even within native speakers of the same language. These variations, determined by geography, class, and race, are always identified with stereotypes. And
All right,
seeing from
I'm going to stop it there. I just wanted you to get a feel for this sort of gentleness that he, and later on I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you two other clips that are more apropos of the book, but there's just something so kind about him, and his concern about stereotypes and the voiceless really was one of the motivations for this book. So I'm going to close this. So I want to start with, so there are three questions. Well, the first question I want to ask all of you is, what are there's two, the title of the book and the title of the book within the book both have multiple meanings. So first, let's look at the meanings of the word of the book of trust. So what are all the possible meanings of trust?
To have
All of
faith
which
in
have-
something, believe in something, to know that it's truthful.
Well, those are two, you've got two there, that
Oh.
it's truthful because you can, and to believe in it or believe it. Those are two aspects of it. So
Okay.
truthful and believing it. What else?
Something
A
that you
trust-
hand down to the next generation.
Right. So it's monetary. You leave money in trust. Now, what do trusts like that do? When you leave money in a trust, what are you doing?
You're preventing one person from getting it and or other people from getting it, and ensuring that it goes along a specific trajectory.
And
No
there are strings.
taxes.
No taxes.
No
And there are
taxes.
strings on the trust, right? You can put on a trust not available till they're 32.
Right.
Or, just if you have, you can put anything you want, only if they marry a redhead. I mean,
Yeah.
so trusts are strings on money. What else?
Control.
Control.
Right.
So in a trust fund, but there's also other kinds of economic trusts.
Well,
Right? What
I mean,
else?
to some degree, if it's not being held for many, many years, you're setting the person up for, you can be setting the person up for some life of ease. If they want to do something with their work life that's different or something like that.
And you could also be setting them up for a life of waiting for the money.
True.
You
I mean,
could.
yeah,
well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, to me, the other word I think of when I think of trust, besides everything we discussed about, is legacy, because you can have that corpus protected and used toward what you care about long, long, long after you're gone.
Yeah. So it's also legacy. And he's obsessed with legacy. Bevel is obsessed with his legacy. Right. So legacy.
Trust
What?
is also who you believe in. Like you trust a person,
Right.
and
So
you
do you-
trust a person's judgment, and you trust yourself.
So who in this book is trustworthy? of that kind of trust?
Bevel's
narrator-
wife, the
the,
wife.
the narrator author person, the third one.
Ida. Okay, so Ida, but she is part of his deception.
Right. She's
Right,
also being paid by him, so right. But she's a journalist, so we hope she's doing her own independent research.
Right. Well,
But I
and
trust her most of all the scenarios,
okay.
narratives.
So then the other word, any other? So
Mildred,
Mildred, but you feel like you could trust Mildred because she seems to be the most real person, but we don't have, we have very little, we only have the diary of her dying.
at the end, right, and
The
that's
end. So we don't-
where her partnership with her husband, and really she was the director of everything, but he trusted her, and there was a trust between them, and they had their very unusual partnership where she made all the decisions and he took all the credit.
Well, not according to him.
And then she didn't talk to him for 2 years.
Right.
Right. So it's there's a great this is at the end of the book. I'm jumping ahead, but on page 347 in the hardback, I don't know if there is, maybe it's this is Ida talking, she's having dinner with Bevel when they have champagne. I knew it. I was not drunk. That was my story, the retelling of detective novels over dinner. Bevel had read it in my pages. It was one of the scenes I had made up for Mildred, following his request to create homey episodes using my feminine touch. I had based it on my dinners with my father, who listened, riveted to my recounting of the latest Dorothy Sayers, etc. Then she says,
So we don't trust her, not what she writes.
yeah.
So we don't trust
Later,
what she
over
writes.
the years, both at work and in my personal life, I've had countless men repeat my ideas back to me as if it were theirs, as if I would not remember having come up with these thoughts in the first place. Is it possible that in some cases their vanity had eclipsed their memory, so that thanks to the selective amnesia, they could lay claim to their epiphany with a clean conscience? Now, and even back then in my youth, I was acquainted with this parasitic form of gaslighting, but someone presenting one of my family stories as theirs, question mark. But what was fascinating about, I only sort of noticed that really well, noticed it so seriously in the third reading after I'd seen these interviews, because you have to remember a man wrote that. And there's some, Diaz's attuneness, that's a word, being in tune with some of the issues of many of the issues about being a woman, a smart woman, he just seems to have like his hand on the pulse. And that's why when you see what he's like when he talks, I really think you sort of get a feel how someone could be like that, which is interesting.
Because
also,
he's been a minority everywhere. Maybe he sort of feels for an underdog in different situations. I mean, it's actually going around on Twitter right now about, women who aren't given credit for their own jokes, and that men will say it louder. And so you can read that and say, I'll pick this flower for my vase. I'll pick this one. Just like I'll read, what is it, Grant's biography, and I'll give it that voice. You can pull things and then make it yours.
Yeah. And but there's also a thing going around in various places on social media about, are you allowed to tell someone else's story?
Right.
If you're a man, can you speak in the voice of a woman? If you're white, can you speak in the voice of someone who's Black? If you're Christian, can you speak in the voice of someone who's Jewish? I mean, gay, not gay, all of them. are you allowed to have make up fiction? And that's another, and I mean, if I was ever in a position to have to defend that point of view, I'd make them read Diaz.
What was the book with Desert Island Records last year? Because that was a similar theme. It was a woman who wrote a woman who was intern to an old novelist, like, and it was Philip Roth's one-time assistant. And then she talked about being a liaison of this older writer. And then she writes a story in a man, maybe in an Iraqi war. And then in the end, you go back and realize that she was now a famous author and she could write in any voice that she wanted to. It was one of your weeks. It was one of your books.
Yeah. The name of it is escaping me. Anybody
But it's
younger
the same.
remember?
But it's like that.
Yeah.
It's like this book. Like this is your theme running through it.
Nemesis?
What?
Nemesis?
It wasn't, is that not a Philip
No,
Roth?
that's a Philip Roth.
I don't know if this is a,
It was right after he died because she couldn't publish it while he was alive. And
I
she
don't think
worked
we
for-
did that one with this book club.
we did,
did.
and
We did.
she's becomes his lover, that one?
Yeah, and then there's 3 sections, and then Desert Island Records is featured somehow as like the last interview of
Yeah.
her, and she says that someone says you can't write the book in another way, but I decided that I can, and I did. So it was like
I don't
this.
remember. We'll have to look
Yeah.
again. We'll have to look it up. Look at the name. So then the other type, he talks about. There's a great article which I'll also send you about in the Atlantic. But he characterizes each of these. Book 1 is a novel. Book 2 is a manuscript. Book 3 is a memoir, and book 4 is a diary, which is real. So he not only is he going across voices, he's going across genres. And in the first one, the novel is called is called Bonds.
Which is also a double entendre.
Yes. So
Right.
what are all the things that bonds can mean?
It's
Connections.
a type of security,
Right.
and it's also
Connection, relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You're bonded, or your
Mhm.
bonds are broken.
Shackles.
Could be being held down, like tied down.
Bound, bond. And then there's the financial.
Mhm.
And it's not clear. I mean, in this novel, it can be all of them. You know, right? The Benjamin, it's a pseudonym. I mean, I know pseudonym is the right word. No,
Alias.
yeah, for that, the Benjamin Rask and the death of his wife. And what do we find out later about the author? That the name just went out.
Banner? you mean?
Yeah, not Bevel.
Ida.
No.
No. The man.
Bonner.
Banner.
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 Yes,
Yeah.
Banner.
And
Banner.
he would come to their house in some of those concerts.
Right.
He was there.
She had a relationship with a good relationship as opposed to her husband who despised him.
Right. And so Bevel doesn't tell Ida is it's not just that he doesn't portray her right, that she liked him. It's like, I mean, I've taught, I don't know why but My Last Duchess, and when the poem, and what is her sin? The reason he has her killed is she smiled at someone. And that's a smile she should have only had for him. And this is similar to that. He destroys this man, not only because he doesn't like the portrait, but because he had the temerity to have his wife like him more. Or like him.
The only thing I don't understand is in that book that he wrote, he portrayed her as insane. So, but it doesn't seem like she was in real life. So
It sells books. It sells books.
Yes, and
And that's And that lets him have an excuse on why it needs to be rewritten, but he wants her to be rewritten so interesting that nobody would ever look at her files or papers, of which nothing of import was left except for one, little journal that was hidden. He doesn't want anybody to ever find out his secret, which was her brain.
Yeah. And I think that while at first you think he's the defender, it turns out he's also, doing it for his own purposes and painting her the way he wants, and to make it here on page, going backwards it seems, but let's look on page 300. It says, this is Ida talking. After her death, her husband thought her presence should be reduced even more. Bevel's decision to write an autobiography was moved to a large extent by his desire to clear his wife's name and show that she was not the mentally ill recluse in Vanner's novel. But reading these pages, it seems that more than vindicated Mildred, he wanted to turn her into a completely unremarkable, safe character, just like the wives in the autobiographies of the great men I read during that time to come up with Bevel's voice, put her in her place. Perhaps this is what Harold Vanner tried to do in his way at all. Why present that broken image of Mildred in his novel? This is a question I've asked myself again and again since first reading Bonds. Why make her mad when she was obviously so lucid? Over the years, I considered different answers: jealousy, vengeance, sheer malice. But in the absence of detail about Vanner's life, I always come back to the same conclusion. He broke her mind and her body simply because it made for a better story, a story he could not resist telling, even if it debased her and in the end destroyed him. He forced her into the stereotype of fated heroines throughout history, made it to offer the spectacle of their own ruin, put her in her place.
I like that part. I'm glad he wrote it that way. I thought it was very interesting to hear about early psychotherapy, talk therapy, and unfortunately, electroshock therapy. I felt a little physically ill with the way he described her after the electroshock therapy. I thought it was very interesting. So, and he didn't use her name. So really, did he do anything wrong?
Well, Bevel seems to think they're completely recognizable. We don't know. I mean, would anybody?
Well,
He
actually,
thinks the world turns around him. So
but
the other books, he might think the same.
when you finished reading Bonds and then you started reading his, what was his narration, I kept thinking, gee, this sounds awfully similar in so many ways to that first book, Bonds. I didn't know where we were going with it, but
It had to be connected.
yeah.
Right. I mean, he comes off as completely narcissistic, but he does say that there are people who came up to him and said, this book is obviously about you. So others thought so as well.
I think if you're such a big figure in the financial community or elsewhere, it would be recognizable, I think.
Yeah.
The dresses were similar, so
You
many.
could say it's similar to people watch Succession now and think it's all about Rupert Murdoch's family, but they do have creative license.
Right. But also, it seems that he really did have a hand in the crash of 29, at least in this world. So that people, I think, recognize he comes out of it rich.
I don't think people used to think we had creative license. It was very upsetting in some movie about JFK where I think Roger Stone admitted to changing details to tell the story.
Right.
I don't think that we thought you had creative license. I think you would cover the name so that you couldn't be sued or shouldn't be sued. But I don't think that people would suspect that anything was different than the way it was told. I think that people would buy it. I mean, even with internet, it took us a while to realize that people, show you only a weird view and then change for a storytelling.
When you started the second section, when did you start to figure out what was going on, what he was doing? When you read the first section, I thought that's what the book was going to be. Sort of this Edith Wharton-esque story. And then it stops abruptly. And I was very annoyed when it started, stopped, and then I'm reading a Victorian, a turn of the century novel. That's fun.
And the
And then,
language
oh.
was beautiful.
Right.
I thought
Beautifully
there was
written.
masterful sentences in there, and then tone and everything changes on a dime.
Right. And in my life, yeah, this is what the article in how the article in the Atlantic characterized it. It's the eerily depiction of his stock market success and his recently deceased wife, Mildred, eerily resembles the story just relayed in Bonds. Presented in manuscript form, Bevel's autobiography is both bombastically overwritten. He frequently compares his life's trajectory to that of the nation, and legacy is even one of the chapters, and underwritten, peppered with little notes to himself to fill in details, more on Mildred's spirit, more home scenes, little touches, anecdotes. And when Ida goes, I just reread this, I'd forgotten this. Ida goes with the housekeeper to see how she did the flowers. And what does it turn out?
She goes into her room.
Yeah, but the housekeeper didn't know Mildred.
Yes, all those people were fired, and then a whole new staff was put in place.
Right. No one knew her, had no idea if she arranged flowers or not.
Mhm.
No one knows. So he's erased her.
It
The only
sounds like in this discussion, we think Mildred's diary is truthful. I question that. I think the point is that all 4 versions, none are accurate.
Okay, that's fair. There's no reason to. So what's the point of Mildred's section then?
Another perspective. And
Or
it's
a
a
twist.
diary, like you said.
It's a
And the women's
twist.
one. What'd you
It's-
say?
It's a twist.
Yeah, exactly.
All of a sudden, she was the one who predicted the crash and who helped with the recovery.
And who made him wealthy. But to me, the whole point of the book is that it's like fake news, that you can't trust what you're reading. And there could be 4 perspectives to a story. So to me, it was just one more. And I think we're left with, we don't know, I thought.
They're all unreliable narratives. And I think
Right.
to back up your point, I forget the woman's name that's Mildred in the novel in the beginning.
Helen.
Helen, she had, right, because they said later awards were given in her name, they were the Helens.
Yeah.
She wrote tons and tons and tons of journals. I remember when her father was reading them, she started doing creative writing just to make him crazy.
Right.
Well, actually, I shouldn't say crazy because that eventually happened, but just to mess with him.
Yeah.
And isn't she rambling? I know she's medicated, but that's another thing why I thought she wasn't completely trustworthy. I didn't read it so recently, but doesn't she ramble?
Oh, it's like
so much. It's a little, it stops. It sort of falls, it kind of ends, a chapter ends and it picks it up. You sort of get the feeling that she, loses consciousness or falls asleep or whatever.
That's why I thought it wasn't completely trustworthy.
That's fair. That's completely fair. I mean, I think, I think that's obviously a possibility. I mean, and then we go. So then we have that. So then we have this ridiculous book with all these fill-in, like he didn't have any idea who she was, or it's completely he has nothing to say. There's so many gaps unless he's talking about his grandiose versions of himself. More on Mildred's spirit, more home scenes, her little touches, anecdotes. And then, I mean, it reminds me of when very often students are trying to write a short story and they'll write the beginning, they go, yeah, and then they'll write a sentence like, and then there was a big fight and all the horses died. Well, okay, and it's like he's filling in like just these lines without actually telling that story. So then the third section, memoir, I loved this, a memoir remembered. Well, that's like saying, cold, cold. It's a memoir is something remembered. So this is remembering a memoir. And this is about Ida Partenza, who is hired as the ghostwriter.
Well, history is being told by the victor, and all of those great men with these uninteresting wives were actually great. Behind every great man is this highly supportive woman whose only way to be able to play on Wall Street is if her husband's some sort of a tycoon, and the only way that he could have done it is to borrow from her. I mean, that's believable.
Right.
I guess we can pick and choose what we believe.
She calls it a project of bending and aligning reality, which is how
That was
what
in
he
both
said.
novels. Yeah.
Yeah. And had she written, but the thing is, had she finished it, written it the way he wanted it written, it would have been unreadable. It would have been a terrible book. Again, with all these sort of fake fill-ins and things that don't work. And, it would have been a terrible book, and certainly nobody would have read it, except for maybe and then he dies and it doesn't matter. And then the last section, the diary, is called Futures. And what are the double meanings of futures?
Also a monetary.
Yeah.
vehicle.
It's a monetary vehicle. It's your future, what you're going to do. And it's not just future, it's futures. And written by a person who has no future. Is dying relatively young. Whether or not what version of her death we believe, everyone agrees that she dies young.
Well, she spent what part of her life she could trying to direct the future by, her investments and her support of certain artists and organizations. So that was the way she tried to manipulate the future, I guess.
Yeah, giving grants but what about after the crash, for which she feels responsible? If you believe that part of it, that she, was really the brains behind it, what does she try to do? Because it says when Ida finds the papers,
Right.
Oh, there's another, I don't know.
She tried to help people or institutions that were harmed by the crash. It said something about that.
If she had just said future, you couldn't attach it to the security. You had to say futures. Even if the other side doesn't work are we really talking about multiple futures? But you sort of said it, Stacey, in that for the continuation or the support of, those who had really lost during the crash. She was helping to secure better future for them, or futures for them.
But she manipulated the market using futures. That's how, that's how she manipulated the market and created the whole situation.
Well, she also saw a way to cheat, but she didn't advocate for cheating it. She just knew that you could get ahead of the tickers that were slower than the ability to purchase. But he went and actually was dishonest by bribing and getting that information. So she saw through the system, but she didn't have his greed.
Right. And now there's a whole, in current stock and bond selling, and there's a whole thing about how fast and who gets the information by milliseconds. And I just spoke to a young woman who goes to my shul, who's working on algorithms to get it first. That's her job, is finding, she's a physicist and to do that. So we're still doing that, or the financial world is still doing it. I'm certainly not doing it.
Anybody captivated by the notes, the C, F sharp, D?
Yeah.
Did you know what that was, or?
I'm not musical enough to know. Did it have, what it,
Yeah, so you know the thing. Dum, dum. wait,
Palindrome. It was a
Uh,
musical palindrome. That way you can predict
uh,
an echo by its sound.
dum, 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 dum,
you can
dum.
predict what the next thing is? Next note is?
Well, it kind of, it is a
Because it's a palindrome.
but
They
it's
even have
also a
Madam on Adam
doorbell
in there.
ring. It's a doorbell ring that you're familiar with.
Yeah.
And by doing that, you sort of complete it. It works as a system. It works as a, musical phrase. What I didn't get, and I went over to the piano to do that, was what happened in the market and all. Because then it doesn't ring and, fall together right. I mean, I can play it for if you want me to, but the notes just they don't come together. They don't make anything. They're very discordant. There's no pattern. So I was wondering what that was all about.
Yeah, that
Not predictable. Like when you say dum, 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 it fits, it works. But if you have these other notes, they just don't work together at all.
Cacophonous.
They're discordant.
That's so interesting. So it's the illusion of things having a pattern, but not really, but it doesn't really.
Yeah.
It's
doesn't
math
like
and
me.
music being the same. She's this math genius, right? And so she has it connected to the music part of her brain. And so she just feels it. I don't even know that she can put it into words well enough to make it effectively communicate, but she just feels it the same way she feels music.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. In an interview, the essential theme, what sparked him was, this is a quote from Diaz. Well, look, I find reading about wealth in America, both in history and in fiction, women have been completely and utterly erased from those narratives. If they appear in narratives of wealth, it is mostly three pre-assigned roles, either as wives, as secretaries, or as victims. And sometimes the secretaries become wives and victims. And I was interested in taking all these three positions, these stereotypical positions, and subverting them. So the first book is, there's about a wife. Ida's book is about a secretary, and they're all about victims, which is interesting. And Diaz said what he wanted to do was fill in the gaps. He also told, I don't know if it's in one of the clips. Let me see if it's in one
Ida is a victim?
Yeah, well,
or just subordinated?
Yeah, and she, I mean, she finally sort of works her way out of it. He dies conveniently. She contains her father. She gets rid of that horrible boyfriend.
She goes to college and becomes a successful writer, which is breaking the chains expected of her generation.
Right.
So
She never got married.
Right. Right.
But
There's
why
always
was
a
the element of-
sacrifice.
You just
was that a fact?
mentioned the elements of her story where she's the victim with the boyfriend and the father, so she is.
Yeah,
She
okay.
could have been. She
Got out of it.
She got out of it. Yeah. I mean, I think she's in, but she also she gets out of it by not behaving so well.
Also,
She was
consider
ready
the
to
fact,
publish that horrible book.
consider the fact that her trajectory was totally changed by this man. She came there to be his secretary. She had no idea she was applying for a job. And in some ways, ironically, him pushing her to do something somewhat unethical and out of her seeming, wheelhouse, changed her trajectory because she started writing.
And she also
He
came
made
in.
her a writer.
He did.
She was a writer. She just got the opportunity to write.
There. Well,
She
my
also came-
favorite, W.P. Kinsella says, I'm sure I've quoted this many times, writers write, other people talk about it. So yeah, fair enough. But she might not have ever discovered that about herself. She might not have ever tapped into it had she not taken that job. It wasn't something she was hoping to do. But you're right, he brings it out of her. Then, here, let me see.
Maybe she also was able to get that room of her own, right? She was
Right.
able to afford space, get out of that relationship that she thought she was going to have to marry Jack because, you know, he was interested in her and she didn't like people. And, you know, she was stuck with her father until she was able to marry and move into their house. So like that was her room of her own. That was that unattainable thing for her generation again.
Yeah, yeah. And he gives it to her. All right, I want to show you. I think this is, again, I'm not going to show you the whole thing, but I'll give you the, it's a great, I think this is the one where he talks about.
Molly, you can
There's
widen
two
this.
of them,
Oh, you
but,
got it.
What'd you say?
Widen the screen with the, there, that's it.
See, Eric, I'm learning from you.
Oh, yeah, yeah, just, you want to learn from me, yeah.
Fumble around.
into the novel, there was one particular woman who wrote at home.
So wait, let me go back a little bit.
Library. 3,364 of you were able to check out a copy of his novel Trust to read along with us. And Ernan is live with me in the green space at WNYC. 3,364 people.
I had no idea. That's so great to hear, also because I'm such a fan of the New York Public Library, and a great part of the book was written there.
I remember you telling us, I think we had you on the show for a preview and you were explaining some of the research you had to do.
That's right. That was on Ron Carter's birthday.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
No pressure. You get
No.
to go after Ron Carter. Yes.
What are some of the things, I remember you telling us early on, some of the things you did. You read about women of this era.
Yeah.
The wives are also a very rich men of this era. What were you looking for? And what was something that you learned that you was really useful?
Weirdly, what I learned that was really useful going through these materials was not in the materials themselves, although there was a wealth of information in there about their daily habits, which felt somewhat suffocating. Maybe I'm assigning this to them, but some of these details made it into the novel. There was one particular woman who wrote at home, you know, on every, you know, page after page, you start feeling the sense of oppression. Details about their everyday lives. There's lots of lists and inventory, so you get a sense of the quotidian life. But two things were crucial discoveries. The first one was the restricted role to which most of these women had been confined within the household, which was a crushing thing to witness firsthand. And the second thing was that so many of these documents hadn't been touched for sometimes a century. So they had been archived and they had remained there, you know, and I would open them and they would be crumbly. It was clear that nobody had touched those papers in decades or maybe a century. So to this day, the voices of those women remain unheard to a large extent.
Oh, that's so interesting. What did that feel like?
It was very poignant. It was very sad. It was very moving, and it really shaped that part of the book a lot. There is, I should add, for those who haven't read, there is one such journal in the book, and my experience of reading the real journals really permeated the writing of that part.
You know, I was interviewing one of the cast members.
So I think that, I mean, there's the rest of the interview is also fascinating. But I think that I kept thinking of it like Midrash. He wants to fill in the stories that haven't been told, and he's looking for the gaps. And I think he very successfully finds them. Wait, there's another.
It's sort of like, I mean, it's what Ziva or someone was saying earlier, that you can tell the story so many different ways from those gaps, or so that's really interesting to me, that we knew certain things about her life, and then you could fill it in this way, or you could fill it in that way. She could be sick with cancer, she could have and since the facts in the encyclopedia don't necessarily line it up as the truth of her life, there's so much room for fiction.
Right. And another comment that Diaz made about the book, he says he looks for the gaps. He says no one among Edith Wharton, F. Scott Fitzgerald, who talk about, Gatsby, money, even American Psycho, none of them talk directly about the money and how it is made. And this is, I love this. Diaz calls it their money adjacent. And she repeats her father's line. It's on 299. He would always say that every dollar bill had been printed on paper, ripped off a slave's bill of sale.
It's great.
Which I think just is a brilliant line. And
I also like the used money when he described, when she felt those bills, she heard her father's voice, and also talk about it as the hands of all the working class people.
Right. And also he describes, let me see, I have the quote. He describes the way the cover of the book looks. And he says, it's green with gray and a black font, reminiscent of a dollar bill, which is exactly what he's done.
Yep.
And that glass is the cover of the stock ticker.
Yeah, the glass is the stock ticker, but the color but he specifically talks about, I believe he's talking about the book Bonds. And that's which I thought was very interesting. But I think without dwelling on it, that's the wrong word, without really going into it, this notion of there's no lawfully gained money, or certainly not wealth like that. And I mean, and that to look on the underside, and so our classic novels about wealth don't do that. And he cites Wharton, and he cites Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald never talks about how the money, I mean, one of the speculations in Gatsby is, how did he make the money? Bootlegger and criminals and other, but where did, it's ill-gotten gains is the stock market. And Gatsby is riveting by the fact of it basically predicts the crash in 29, although it was written in 25. And he talks about the excesses and how it's going to, and it's all going to come crashing down, which Fitzgerald didn't actually know, but he thought about it. And so on page 246, Diaz describes, this is again, I feel like Ida is the most like him. At first, Bonds was not just literature, it was evidence. And I was not just a reader, I was a detective. There had to be clues in there, however superficially. Harold Vanner had met the Bevels. And then he says here, later, when I finally went to college, I would be able to trace Vanner's literary influences and consider his novel from a formal point of view, even if he was never assigned reading for any courses I took, since his work was out of print and already quite unavailable. Yet back then, I had never experienced anything like that language, and it spoke to me. It was my first time reading something that existed in a vague space between the intellectual and the emotional. Since that moment, I have identified that ambiguous territory as the exclusive domain of literature. I also understood at some point that this ambiguity could only work in conjunction with extreme discipline. Could only work in conjunction with extreme discipline. The calm precision of Vanner's sentences. Lucidity, he seemed to suggest, is the best hiding place for deeper meaning, much like a transparent thing stacked in between others. But Banner gave me my first glimpse of that elusive region between reason and feeling, and made me want to chart it in my own writing.
There were parts of his book that were really nice, hearing about these weird people who found their quiet places with each other and it worked out. I mean, that was a nice read, and that might be what she's referring to, is what does a storyteller say that draws an audience? And, he went off the deep end at the end because, a book has to get more interesting. And, he went off the deep end at the end because, whoops. But it was interesting somewhere like 30 or so pages into the second unit, I wouldn't say chapter, but the second book within the book, that he actually has some parallel phrases that you see that he wants to make the first book look true but distorted. And then when he starts having the incomplete chapters, it sort of feels like the movie Vanilla Sky, where he starts using incomplete chapters. It sort of feels like the movie Vanilla Sky, where there's like it's funny that I'm having
I don't know.
There's like a glitch system, and the glitches in the system makes you realize that what you're watching is artificial.
Yeah. And the beginning, it feels like I got all very excited. Oh, I'm figuring this out. Oh, look, it's the same story told another way. And then you realize, yes, but no, something else.
You've got to read it multiple times, which is cool. I wish I had the time to
Well,
I listened to part of the book on Audible.
listen to part of the book.
And Audible had, first thing I noticed when I bought or used the credit, it said about 4 different voices were going to be in the book. So I wondered what was going to happen. And then I saw after book 2 was then a different reader than book 1 and book 3. I actually didn't listen to book 4, at all, but
I listen, I read and I listen when I run.
are we not all understand that you're speaking?
Yeah, I'm not getting it.
yeah, I don't know. This must be, I don't know where
The Zoom thing.
it's a Zoom thing.
Hello?
Yeah.
It seems better now. It's good.
Yeah, I think it sort of goes in and out.
I was just gonna say the reader for Bonds was fantastic.
Yeah.
He just, right, the way he inflected, you felt the writer, the writing, the style.
Wait. Say the last part again. We kind of lost you. Say the last part again. We kind of lost you.
Am I back? Just how good the reader was, and that he spoke in the same style of the writing. And there's some like witty or sad lines that are very short, often at the end of the chapter in Bonds, and he delivers them just right.
Yeah.
It was a good read, good listening, that part.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And it was so, because I was disappointed when it switched voices. Because I thought, I was really enjoying that, really getting it. It switched voices. Because I thought, I was really
Molly,
enjoying that, really getting it. Does this have to do with the fact that it's being recorded, that it's repeating?
No, I think it might be what someone said, Zoom.
It's just a Zoom thing?
Maybe if you stop the
Same
video.
thing happened with Laura and with Rachel and you.
Okay, the last bit of him talking is him talking about partially about his research. He's very clear that he does a great deal of research for all his books. Well, his books, there's so many. Research for all his books. Not his books.
Yeah.
It's horrible. And he says that it's a danger for a writer, because you can get so enamored of the research that it's a great way to not write. I'll do one more, I'll look at one more thing, I'll look at one more manuscript and whatever. So he speaks right, but this this segment is him talking about sort of the nature of, well, let me share my screen, the nature of literature and how, because there's sort of a thing, we, you know, we're so big into originality that he talks about the role of literature. Okay.
Molly, this is why we have to go back to doing this in person.
Oh, I want to talk about that at the end. I'm really desperate.
It really shaped that part of the book a lot. There is, I should add,
Yeah, let me go
for
back a
those who
little
haven't read
bit.
of the New York Public Library, and
Oh, I did that. No.
a
Oh,
great
no, I
part
did
of the
this
book
one
was
already.
written
Wait a
there.
minute.
I remember
Where's-
you telling us,
yeah.
I think we had you on the show for a preview.
No,
You
no.
were
Stop.
explaining.
Where's
some
the
of
other one?
the-
Sorry, wait a minute. Sorry, where's the other one? Close this. Maybe it's the other one, or maybe it's further along in that same one. There's one more.
That was the book by Philip Roth's protege.
Yeah.
That was the book by.
Yeah. What was the book? What's the name of it? Oh, I guess it's further along in this same one. He talks about, let me see if I can get it, and then if I can't get it right away.
Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday was the
Oh,
book I was
right,
referring to the beginning
Asymmetry.
before.
Right. I love that book. I should have remembered it.
It's a great book.
The
with
mind
us, And
here.
Ernan.
Let's see.
I think there are a number of reasons. One is simply she really needs to
Let's see.
her father, not very effective out in the real world, and it's the depression. They're broke. They need the money. As simple as that. And she needs to,
No,
face these.
I'm
And
gonna,
also, I think
I'll
feels
send this
confident
to
enough
you.
about her own reasons.
To not find it, but he talks about, he talks at length about that reading, that literature is about it is about replicating itself. It is its own thing. You're not trying to replicate reality, you're trying to replicate literature, and that's a good thing. Reality, you're trying to replicate literature, and so annoying. I don't know why it's happening. Matthew, Matthew still here? Does you have any insight?
Yeah. Yes, I was looking at the mics. It looks I forget whose it was. Rachel, I think her mic was going at the same time as yours was. So you're getting a feedback loop. That's all. So I muted her for the moment. My apologies, Rachel. But that should alleviate the issue.
All right, well, let's see what happens. All right, so let's okay, so let me go to Diaz describes his own process in describing Ida's process. Did I do that? Because he is like Roth. He is referring back to himself. Oh, here in one of the later on in the interview, he talks about how important reading had been and all the influences. And this is Ida speaking on page 312. It was much harder to find books that could help with Mildred's story. After reading the review of Vanner's Bonds mentioning Edith Wharton, Amanda Gibbons, and Constance Fenimore Wilson, who I don't know, I had immediately looked up their work. Still, because they pre-existed Mildred by a generation or two, their New York sets or their cliques of American expats in Europe felt outdated. After consulting with librarians, I read in a haphazard way everything I thought could be inspiring, from Emily Post's Etiquette to Vina Del Mar's Bad Girl. But my focus, if one could call my slapdash approach that, was in more or less contemporary American authors whose work might perhaps be pertinent. Among them, I remember immensely disparate writers such as Dawn Powell. Have you ever read Dawn Powell? Dawn Powell's riveting. And she is a very, very interesting writer in that she's been lost a bit. Only English majors read her, and she's incredible. Maybe I'll do one of hers next. Ursula Parrott, Anita Loos, Elizabeth Harlan, Dorothy Parker, and Nancy Hale. Only a few of them turned out to be germane to my work, and none captured the atmosphere of subdued wealth I wanted for Mildred. And then he goes, but that's real. That's, I think, in very much Diaz describe. He's. Oh, I gotta get rid of.
Can you spell Dawn Power? Dawn, D-A-W-N?
Yeah, Dawn. It's
Powell, Powell.
Yeah, Powell. Why is this? Let me go. Yeah, well, I gotta get back to this. Where can I find? I can't find you people. Am I still sharing my screen?
No.
No, I'm not. Okay, good. Maybe just get rid of it. I've got my thing in the way. I can't make it smaller. I'm telling you, Eric, it's all your fault. I'm just saying. I can't get it to go away.
If you're holding me up as a paragon of tech, you're in trouble. Can I ask you one thing while you're doing this?
Yes.
I mean, one of the things that like impressed me so much, and maybe it took me longer to get the whole thing than some of you. I mean, I probably didn't get what was happening until we got to Ida's story. But does he talk about at all the gamble that he took, in basically writing the first two parts of the book that replicated themselves, once it dawned on me that, oh, this is what he's doing, but it takes a while to get there. And it seems like as a writer and as a young-ish writer, it's a big risk, isn't it?
Isn't it like you weren't expecting that you were reading a mystery novel and then it turns out you were?
Yeah, like things are popping out. I think I said this, it was almost like those Russian dolls or whatever, it's like, until you realize what he's up to, it's a little repetitious.
That's a great metaphor.
But then, thanks. But I mean, whatever. I'm sure other people have said that, but
yeah.
But yeah.
So
I think
wait,
a lot
so
of people would have put it down during the second one, because I kind of felt like, where is he going with this? Like I was very confused.
I thought it got better as you go on, if you stuck with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when it
Even in
dawns
the
on you,
first
like,
part,
But
I
you were
thought,
almost halfway through the book and you still didn't know what was going on and why the
Right.
book was called Trust.
John, what were you going to say?
even in the first part, it was good. I was enjoying it, but I was thinking, how can anyone nowadays write a novel like this? Because for the most part of it, there was essentially no dialogue. It was all told, in the third person. So I had this feeling there must be something else that's eventually going to happen.
That's why, by the way, it was good to listen to that part, because you didn't have to worry about the different voices. It's often, I find hard when one person is doing the voicing of, like a woman is doing of a man or a man is doing of a woman. I get thrown off by it, but this was so lyrical, and so it was great.
And it's funny, I had the opposite feeling of, oh, good, somebody's writing an old-fashioned novel. This will be fun. And
I
then
had that, in a way, I had that feeling too, but in an old-fashioned novel, the people talk.
it's true, all true.
I grew up where a friend of the family, and an adult, one of my parents' friends, would open a book from the middle on a beach because there's so much character development. He just wants to meet them fully developed. And I really thought of him with this book and how much, he misses out on all of it, but how he especially would have missed this. You know, two totally different tellings of the same people's story, and then how you try to justify them when you have, you know, more sources of information.
Yeah, yeah. And I
What a
think,
nut.
yeah, that's a separate. The other thing, he says the beauty of literature resides, oh, here, this is the one I wanted to write. Let me get this. This is the one I wanted to do, I think.
I think there is
Oh, here you go. Wait a second.
another
what was
art
it?
form that is able to do that.
Here you go. This is the one I was looking for. And now I'll go back and share my screen. And this is the one I because this is exactly, I think, what he's talking about. It's what I get for. Okay, now let's see if we can do it. Okay.
To that extent, mainly because I believe that literature's prime material is meaning, right? It's meaning, and literature is there to show us how there can be beauty in meaning. And this is, I think, what makes the literary experience so unique. And I'm sort of addicted to that feeling. I'm hunting for this feeling all the time. This is what I want to experience as a reader and as a writer.
So I think that describes him. He describes himself as a writer. And one of the things I found very refreshing is it wasn't too long. The current novels, I always want to lop off 100 pages. You know, where is Maxwell Perkins when we need him? I mean, they're just too long. And the experimental things seem very, I don't want to say forced, that's not the right word, but precious. Look at me. Look at this experimental thing I'm doing. And he avoided all of that. It was really novel. But very, very classically told. I think that's the word I'm looking for. It was a classically told read. And you're right that you could give, if you gave up in the middle, you'd miss the whole thing. And I bet there are people who did. Now that he's won the Pulitzer, maybe they'll go back to it. But
and you skip the beginning and you miss it. And you skip any part of it. So that if fiction, you're supposed to understand what it's like to be another person, he's given us a chance to see what it's like to be all these different people in the same room, which is hard to do when you're telling one story.
Right. And it's not just, I think that's what makes it novel, is it's not just points of view. We've all read books in the last whatever number of years. They're from different, you know, we have a point of view here, and then we have another character in it who's telling the same story from their point of view or picks it up from there. I mean, that's it can be a very good genre. It's very interesting, but he doesn't do that. He does this whole other thing. And they're bound by a similar thread. There are these characters who keep coming back, but you don't know. And you said whoever said unreliable, they're all unreliable, but he plays with different forms. I mean, you know, it's a novel, it's a memoir.
Diary.
Diary is the last one. And report. Yeah, I'm missing the middle one. It's let's get rid of this. And yeah, he's
You said a manuscript the first time you did it.
Autobiographical.
Yeah. So get this right.
I think it was nice of him
Memoir
to make them shorter.
What?
He made them each shorter. They were successively shorter. Like we heard a whole drawn out story, and then we heard a nearly complete story or complete enough story. And then it got shorter. and then it got shorter still, which I think was really nice, because you don't want to rehash it. Like if we had gotten something small and then something bigger and something bigger, it would not have had the similar effect, the similar read, the similar mystery.
Yeah.
You know, there's even a story that wasn't told that I was just thinking, like she tells at one point that, I don't know, you know, in my mind, it was like, you know, like the New Yorker was asking her for a piece on her just, you know, going back to the museum, and she never agreed to write that. But that could have been just another.
Wait, what? Say that again?
Oh yeah.
At some point she mentions that a magazine or so, you know, that someone was going to
Ida mentions.
Ida says that, yes.
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, but that was never written. So that could have been, you know, another piece to this, you know, another, her essay for the New Yorker or whoever it was, whoever wanted to hire her.
Oh, that's interesting. I wonder if he had, none of the interviews mention it. I wonder if he had in mind perhaps doing another section of one of, because Ida's writing is about this story. It's not her writing.
Right.
And so we don't have we could have had a piece of Ida's writing, even talking about this same experience.
Right.
I
In
don't
a
know if
way, we have different genres here, and they purport to be getting more and more personal, and therefore presumably more reliable. The first is a you know, a novel. It doesn't claim to be the truth. Then the autobiography, well, people, you know, don't understand themselves, and then we find out that it's mainly ghost written anyway. And then the memoir, which presumably is about other people, so maybe she might be more honest. But then finally the diary entry, which purports to be, you know, written mainly for yourself, and totally personal and unveiled.
Yeah, that's a very good point. They get shorter and they get closer to what is supposed to be the truth. But even diaries aren't reliable.
What does the author teach at, did they say he's at Columbia?
Yeah, I think
Hispanic, he said Hispanic Institute or Spanish Institute, something like that.
Because I was just wondering, like, how he came to write a book like this. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't seem to have a relation. Like, he's not in the literature department. He's not in the history department. Like, interesting. Like,
that's a good, you know what, I did not look up his personal biography.
I guess this could have been just a side thing that had nothing to do with what he teaches. Like,
but it's also,
he is the associate director of the Hispanic Institute for Latin America and Iberian Cultures at Columbia University, and serves as a managing editor of the Spanish language journal Revista Hispanica Moderna. So not the English department.
This is the other thing that when I read that book, was so amazing to me, that this is his third language, and there are very few writers who, you know, I was thinking of Nabokov, who wrote in English, but his first language was Russian, but he grew up with, you know, British governants that were training him in English. But here, I mean, he had Spanish and then Swedish, and then he started to write in English, and he's still a young man, and here he has already a Pulitzer. I thought it's amazing that in his third language he can just start, and now he's still, supposedly he must be still writing in Spanish if he is teaching in the Spanish Institute. It's amazing.
Then there's
it really is. And since I'm talking already, and Polly, I saw that you were so interested. So when I finished and I was completely confused, I went to my favorite magazine, the New York Review of Books, and there's a wonderful article in it. And many things that you mentioned are also mentioned there, and also his autobiography and his other book is described that he also wrote before he wrote Trust.
This is his second book, right?
Trust is his second book, according to the article.
And the
But
first
what
book,
we heard from what you played from the YouTube, she said it's his first book, but in this article, which I trust a little bit more, that's a book related more to Sweden, his first book.
Ah, no, now I have to go back and read his first book.
Yeah.
and that was, I think, a finalist for the Pulitzer.
Yeah, at one point I was reading an article and said finals for the Pulitzer, but I said, wait a minute, how could they have known that? Yeah, I think it was. I also think it was on the Booker list, his first one.
Yeah.
Well, this one was for sure.
This one first was for sure. And I'm sure he would have been very happy with a Booker Prize, but Pulitzer is a whole other level.
What does it mean when it says it was long listed and short listed?
Long listed is when they, I don't know how, I think Booker and Pulitzer, all of them have different numbers, but hundreds and hundreds of books are written. So I think the long list is maybe even, 100 books. And then shortlisted, they get it down to, 25 books, and then they get it down to 10 books, and then they fight over who wins. I've always wanted to be in that room when they're fighting over the last two, and people probably get really, I mean, I know if I was in that room, I would be, my book, I'm right. So those must be riveting discussions, which are never recorded, never.
Well, has the Pulitzer?
That's a heck of a book club.
Yeah. Has the Pulitzer ever been shared in like it is this year?
I don't know. They make a big deal about the fact that it was shared? I said to you before everyone came out, are any of you Kingsolver fans?
Kind of like
You are, you like her. Because I find her unreadable.
No, me too.
Cannot stand her.
Only the big one, the
Poisonwood Bible.
I love
the
that
only
one, and the
It
ones
was
after no.
so long. It was way too long. It
I
should
know,
have been
but it was
half the
so.
length. It was just too long.
I think it's the
I
only
have to
novel I
say-
ever got my husband to read.
I couldn't stop thinking about that book for years and years and years. Like, I don't know.
I couldn't, everyone was reading it, and everyone asked me all the time, have you read it? And I started it maybe twice, and I couldn't read it, and which doesn't happen that often. I can read almost anything. But usually I mostly finish books. I almost always, I couldn't get through it. I was saying earlier to Nancy, I find there's something so angry, aggressive. I don't know. I always find it no redeeming features. And also the anger and all of that, and she's had such a cushy life. I guess that bothers me. She has all this Native American fury, which is well deserved, but she doesn't deserve it. So anyway, but that's
Can I ask, what do you make of how the typeface changes during the third section? Like at first I thought, okay, is it bold because we're in her head? Like I just couldn't figure out why some parts were bold and some parts weren't.
Which part are you referring to? You have the book.
So like during Ida's book, Ida's
italics. A lot of it's in italics.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like in my book, it looks bold. Like some of it looks bold, but some of it looks regular.
Is it like rough notes compared to the stuff that he's gone and edited and fixed up? I wish it would have had her funny E's and I's.
Yeah. No, I think it's because the book opens.
Or is one the present and one the past for
Yes,
her?
it's the present. She said, for years I avoided the main entrance to Bevel House on 87th between Madison and 5th. Now and then walking through the park, I'd catch a glimpse, blah, blah, blah. But years ago, I found the shuttered window. Anyway, a piece in the Times appeared a few weeks later saying that after protracted litigation over the estate, work would finally start to turn the house into a museum it had been intended to become following Andrew Bevel's death.
Just weird. Like every once in a while, there's like a bold word. Like I just don't. Exile is
I
bold.
didn't really see it bold, so I don't really know.
Oh,
This is interesting, which I had, that some 2 years later, in the spring of 1981, every publication in New York featured articles on Bevel House, the city's latest gem, a historical treasure, a cultural jewel. The New Yorker asked me to write something on the reopening of the house without knowing I was once connected to it. I declined. That's what you were talking about. But I think it's also a comment, that's a comment on, I think that goes back to the slaves' bill of sale, that these mansions and the museums and all of that, there's blood money. This beauty, there's, you know, you walk around, you know, the Morgan, or you walk around, you know, any of the Frick, you know, there's blood money. And I think that's one of the things he's getting at here by going under the underlayer, especially her the one where he talks about her guilt about the crash, which she seems to feel in that section feel responsible for. All right, we have a few more minutes left. What else? What have we not mentioned? What idea did we not get to? What thought have you not said?
How about their relationship to each other, the husband and the wife?
Okay, how we have different views of it, right? So what are the varying views, and what do you think is closest to the truth? Well, we can't know that, but what felt the most possible?
Bevel, his is the worst, the way he portrays her, really not capable of anything, sick her whole life. That's the worst. I thought hers was a little grandiose because I just think it's anachronistic. Anyway, anyone else could continue?
What's anachronistic? Which part?
The last one, her being such a great trader. I just can't believe
it. It's interesting that there isn't really, they were kept in their place, and therefore that was the place they had to be.
Yeah, I mean, he had the ticker in the house, so maybe there was more capability or opportunity to do what she did. But you need either some education or some connections, or anyway, whatever. I don't know.
She had a weird outsider's education, right? According to the first part of the story, you know, that she had this father who, you know, would go, you know, into some deep dive of some math thing, some memorization thing.
Yeah.
So not like a classical education, but so, you know, she had to discover reading and music later. Well, she discovered music, but she could have, you know, been such an odd thinker that she wasn't like everybody else's business school experience. She was that outside thinker.
Wasn't
yeah,
she
weird.
a math genius, right? I mean, she was right. So,
I mean, she does magic tricks at the beginning, right? She's rented out as a party trick,
right?
And it's interesting because that was fascinating, that part, and we never go back to it.
yeah.
I thought that part was just I thought that was what it was going to be about.
Yeah, they're both their pasts as children, you know, about the tragedies, their parents dying and their parents going crazy. That was all in the very beginning, right? In the first novel. And then we have to assume that most of that happened because they don't go back to it. I guess Bevel
she lived in Europe in both
his
stories.
father a little bit, but
she lived in Europe in both stories, with that, you know, wandering through Europe in what, you know, either by her mother being a big talker or whatever. She came out of nowhere. She came from nowhere. Her
mother is like comes out of like a vaudeville. I mean, her mother's just a character out of some kind of play that you'd find vaguely annoying, right? Sort of anti-Mame to the 10th.
Or Rose.
Rose, that's what I was thinking.
Rose is better.
Yeah.
The show mom.
Yeah. And always conniving and always manipulating. Yeah. Rose.
But I don't think the two of them had a relationship. He knew nothing about her.
That's true.
And even the way they came together, whether it was in the book, Vanner's book, or seemingly, you know, like through Bevel's understanding of it, like they came together and there was like no spark, no romance, you know, right?
No.
Right. They were like two people that didn't like people. So
but then they didn't have to date anyone else.
Right. Listen, if you watched any of these matchmaking, Indian matchmaking, which of course I watched first, and now there's one of my
I heard there's a Jewish one. I haven't watched
there
it yet.
is one of my
just
former
finished it.
students told me that I had to watch the Jewish matchmaking because she knew I had seen the whole Indian matchmaking, and she said the best thing about it is it doesn't make us look bad. So many of
Does
these
look bad.
things about the Orthodox Jews make everybody look so and this matchmaker, the only thing, there's a political moment that only a very small group of people will know. They show her, the matchmaker, at home with her husband and son, and she's cutting his hair, and it's clearly they're settlers. The kid's got the big kippah, the husband's got the they're clearly living someplace that's in
Shows
dispute.
another time, it shows the Israeli flag flagging on, as flying on top of their house.
Right,
On
right.
top.
But that's so nuanced that we could,
No one would get
Yeah.
that.
we don't have to
She
tell
is
anyone.
charismatic. She is fantastic.
Yes,
I have to-
and she's and it does, and she matches all sorts of people. So, and she seems very, when you watch her take the notes, at one point somebody says something about being kosher, and then, but I eat pork, and then she crosses it off. Kosher. Anyway, it's very good, but I don't know how we got back. Oh, you would, I don't know if anyone would have matched these two up. Yes, Shula. Oh, we can't hear you.
You're
you
not on
muted?
mute, but your volume isn't that.
Put
good.
your volume up. Okay. Sorry, because we didn't hear from you. All right, we are I believe at our time. We have one more minute. Eric and I spoke earlier about doing this in person. Is there any movement among in the book, not just me, but in general, to go back to meeting in person? Has there been talk?
We haven't really talked about it. I haven't taken the surveys or seen results of surveys if they've been taken, but all I can say is we get a lot more people on the Zoom than in person.
It feels weird to interrupt when you're on Zoom, as opposed to like the raising hands and the being there, which in person, was really nice for, letting it be a flow of conversation. And I do know an incoming freshman's mom who would join in person and had previous kids and didn't join on Zoom.
I will, Stacy, I'll put this out to you or who's currently in charge. I would love to do it in person again. And if they want to just do a experimental or do one or whatever.
Yeah.
As long as I'm asked.
You would volunteer for that.
What
so
about
everyone on the screen
by
here,
preference
raise your
of the
hand
teacher?
if you would go back
What
to
about
SAR to do this in person. Raise your hand.
My lights are out.
See, we get thumbs down. We get people with
Yes.
So that's the problem. Like, I just feel like the people that would come on Zoom are more than the people that would come in
What
person.
if it's the teacher's choice and some teachers want to be
Well, we
Zoom and some
said that.
teachers?
A lot of the teachers want to be on Zoom.
But we could also do both.
Yeah.
You can do
Yeah,
a
we
hybrid.
could. Yeah, we could, Molly, we could do yours in person.
The thing is that, I mean, this writers thing, when I saw Herman Diaz speak in this book thing, they do it hybrid. They position the computer sort of, it doesn't block them, but you don't really see the audience, but you can, and people ask questions, stuff, and it's pretty effective. I feel like when, especially most of you are people I don't know, and well, half of you, I guess, I don't know, and so it's hard to, you can't feel it, and I mean, I'm old. I think person is better.
So we should try for that hybrid next time.
Let's, well, anyway, the powers that be, think about it. I am totally willing to do it in person if but I'm also willing to stay on Zoom. I mean, listen, I did just have to go from my dining room into my office, so.
Okay.
There's,
Yeah, no, usually once school ends, that's when we start talking about next year.
Okay,
So
yeah.
I'll bring it up with everyone.
okay, we have good, all right. Terrific.
Have a
Thank
great,
you.
Thank you, Molly.
Thank
It's
you.
Really good.
Thank you, Molly.
have a great
Thanks,
summer,
everyone.
everybody.
Yeah,
Great
Thank you.
summer.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, Stacy, for coordinating.
You're
Thank you,
welcome.
Stacy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye. Thank you.